This is a piece that I made some years ago before I started doing YouTube. It was featured in the Sculpture exhibition video that I posted recently, and that was taken at the Steampunked in Space event a few weeks ago. Someone in the comments said that they'd like to know a little bit more about it, and that actually struck a chord with me, so I have been thinking about sort of doing a retrospective series on some of the pieces that I've done on the channel. Over the last 5 years I've created a ton of stuff, and I thought it might be quite interesting to sort of get it all out on a table and sort of look at where we've come over the last 5 years or so. Hopefully there's been a bit of a progression and maybe a bit of an improvement in some of the stuff I've been producing. So that might be something I do in the future, but for this video I just wanted to have a look at this particular piece because it's had a bit of a journey, and also it features a few techniques I don't really use anymore, but perhaps I should revisit. So as you can see from the title of the video, this is called my Oldroid, and this is actually the third in a series of sculptures I've worked on over the years. The original piece was actually a silicone rubber puppet that I created for a short video, and you can see some of that here. The idea originally came from the idea that if you're going to do a bust, then obviously it's not the complete figure, so you've got to sort of terminate it somewhere, you know, and often busts just end on a sharp edge, you know, and then there's nothing more than the head and shoulders, or perhaps you might cut off that edge with some armour or something like that, just to give a sort of an edge to the sculpture so it doesn't look too unnatural. Now, I thought, well, if I'm going to do a bust, maybe I can actually work the edge of the sculpture into part of the design. And so the idea of having a damaged robot that was only sort of arms and torso came to mind. And so I thought that would be quite a nice way of having a bust, but also having a logical purpose as to why it's only heads and shoulders. So that was where the original idea came from. And I also like the idea of there being an old android, just because it's sort of a bit counterintuitive. I mean, why would you create an android of an old man? Potentially it's from a show, or it's a character of some sort. I quite like the notion that having an old man character as a robot sort of makes the viewer think a little bit, you know, like why has it been done in that way? So I thought that was quite a cool idea, and so I've sort of stuck with the idea through several iterations. I quite like the original version, and obviously I did a short animation with it. It's a bit rough around the edges, as you can see, but you know, I thought the overall idea of the piece was okay. There were some problems with the execution, so that led me to have another go at it, which you can see here. Now this one I don't think worked particularly well at all. The face was silicone rubber. Unfortunately I used tin silicone, and what I hadn't realised at the time is that stuff actually degrades over time and sort of becomes a bit slimy. So after a few years it wasn't in a particularly good shape. I also thought I got the shape of the body wrong really. It just looked a bit rough and really didn't work. So I sort of had two goes at it, and I really felt that I hadn't really sort of quite achieved what I wanted to do with the idea. So I decided to have another go at it. Now at the time I was attending the Asylum Steampunk Festival, and there were several artists who had displays at the event. Now obviously I've since moved on to do that myself, but at the time I was thinking, well, it would be really cool to have a bunch of sculptures on the table, all of which were sort of characters of various types, and I knew that I could get a realistic look to a sculpture using silicone. But I started thinking, well, maybe I can do the same with Sculpey. Obviously Sculpey is flesh coloured, and if you give it a little bit of red paint it can look quite realistic. Obviously it's a lot cheaper than silicone and a bit easier to work with, so I was thinking that maybe that's a way to do a series of busts for relatively low cost. So as you can see, this started off as pretty much any other Sculpey sculpture. I've got a foil base and I'm sculpting the character on top of it. Because he's got some exposed mechanical features, I also used some grey Sculpey underneath as well to sort of differentiate those mechanical parts from the flesh tones. I spent a lot of time trying to do the wrinkle texture on the skin, and I think that came out quite well. I'm a little bit less happy about the proportions of it. I think maybe his head sort of seems slightly too big from certain angles, or there's something about the pose that doesn't quite work for me. Nevertheless, I'm quite happy with this piece. I think it does look quite realistic, given that it's really just made from polymer clay. As you can see, I have a bunch of mechanical items embedded in the Sculpey as well, and that's something that's quite handy with Sculpey. If you do want to have a sort of mechanical creature like this, you can just sort of basically stick things in the clay and cook them. As long as they won't melt in the oven, you're good to go. So with this I put a load of brass pieces below to sort of indicate some spine and sort of piston detail. I've got a few bent pieces of metal coming out the arms as well, and you can see that there's several pistons in his neck. I wanted to make this a very overt steampunk item, so he's got some cogs in the head, and you can see that some of the eye mechanism is exposed as well. I mean, obviously I'm thinking of the Terminator here in a very real way, because you can see the exposed skull and the metal beneath. Now, one thing that is a problem with Sculpey that you don't find with silicon is that this is really a one-shot deal. So you need to cook it in the oven. So there's several drawbacks to that. Firstly, the sculpture can't be bigger than your oven, otherwise you run into problems straight away. Also, you need to be quite careful not to burn the sculpture as well. Now, obviously, one way of doing that is just to forget it's in the oven, and I've done that before and come back to a sort of a smoking ruin. Now, that didn't happen here, but what did happen was that the back of the arm and the ear ended up being quite close to the element in the oven, and so the back of the arm and the ear have both got quite a nasty burn on them, which initially I thought was a bit of a disaster, but because it's a damaged robot, I ended up sort of just working that into the design and say, alright, well, at some point he got burnt, so you know, it sort of worked in the end. But it is a problem with this sort of thing that if you're unlucky, it can just go completely wrong. Another problem I found with Sculpey as well is that it can sometimes crack. I'm a little bit unsure as to exactly why that happens. I think it can be due to different temperatures within the Sculpey. So if there's some particularly thick areas, the interior of the Sculpey can remain uncooked and soft, while the exterior becomes hard, and that can cause it to crack. You can also get these strange sort of half moon shapes in the Sculpey as well, which I think are just more cracks. So there is a bit of a risk with this. You can spend weeks working on your sculpture, get it to exactly where you want, and then when you cook it, it can all go to pot. So I did move away from this technique to a little bit. Having said that, I did get a really nice result with this time, so you know, I think it might be worth trying again if I come up with an idea that warrants it. I tried to keep the paint job very subtle with this. I wanted to retain the skin colour, but it doesn't quite look alive without some paint on it. So what I really did was make a very, very thin wash of red and just put that over the sculpture. I then added a little bit more red to the ears, the mouth and the nose, just to sort of accentuate those bits. And just that little bit of paint really suddenly brought it to life. So it's quite surprising how little I had to do to actually give this a realistic look. So again, that was quite a nice sort of quick paint job there. I also airbrushed a few burnt sections in here as well, just to add a little bit more weathering, but really the paint job was very, very quick on this. So just a quick look at an older sculpture. This has been a regular fixture of my exhibitions whenever I've done one, as it's one of the older sculptures which has really sort of lasted and still looks pretty cool today, I think. I haven't felt the need to revisit this idea, so that probably means I've either worn it out or I got close enough to what I was originally thinking. I think if I were to do it again, I'd probably try and add a bit more detail to the base. I've got some brass pipe work in there, but you know, it's fairly basic. I think it needs a little bit more to it to really sell it. Nevertheless, overall, I'm quite happy with this. So I hope that was an interesting look at something that I haven't featured on the channel before. But for this one, I think that's it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.